Hello dear friends, welcome to Crime Story Diaries. Today we'll be examining a terrifying case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. Daisy Coleman was born on March 30th, 1997, in the small town of Albany, Missouri. She was the second child in the family of Michael and Melinda Coleman, with three brothers, Charlie, Tristan, and Logan. Her father was a doctor and her mother was a veterinarian. The Coleman family led a fairly prosperous life in their old Victorian house, which they renovated themselves. However, Daisy's life changed drastically when she was only 9 years old. In 2009, she was in a car accident along with her father, Michael, and her younger brother on their way to a wrestling competition. Their car collided with an obstacle on the road due to icy conditions. As a result of the accident, Daisy's father died. The girl and her brother survived, getting out through the rear window of the car. This tragedy became a turning point for the entire family. The loss of their father deeply affected Daisy and her brothers. Daily trips past the accident site became unbearable for the family. Eventually, Melinda Coleman decided that they needed a fresh start. In 2010, the family moved to the city of Maryville, Missouri, located approximately 40 miles from their hometown. Maryville was a typical small American town where everyone knew each other, and high school football was the center of community life. The Coleman family hoped to find indemnity and a chance to start over here. They rented a house while keeping their old home in Albany in case they ever wanted to return. At first, it seemed that the move was good for the family. Daisy's brothers were actively involved in sports, and Daisy herself, an attractive blonde with a charming smile, quickly became popular at school. She won several local beauty pageants and joined the cheerleading squad for the school football team. It seemed that life was finally getting better for the Coleman family after the tragedy they experienced. However, this ideal turned out to be short-lived. The events that took place on the night of January 8, 2012, forever changed the lives of Daisy and her family, setting in motion a series of tragic events. On the evening of January 7, 2012, 14-year-old Daisy Coleman invited her best friend, 13-year-old Paige, for a sleepover. The girls watched horror movies and secretly drank alcohol they took from the Coleman family's wine cabinet. It was a common teenage prank that many might consider innocent. Around midnight, Daisy began texting with 17-year-old Matthew Barnett, a popular player on the school football team, and a friend of her older brother, Charlie. Matt invited the girls to hang out at his house. Despite the late hour, Daisy and Paige agreed. At around 1 in the morning on January 8th, the girls snuck out of Daisy's house through her bedroom window. They were met by Matt Barnett and 4 of his friends. The boys drove the Gornas to the Barnett house, where they crawled through a window into the basement, trying not to wake up Matt's parents, who were sleeping upstairs. According to Paige, as soon as they got into the basement, Matt started plying Daisy with alcohol. Daisy drank one glass after another, almost without pause. At some point, one of the boys, Nicholas, took Paige into an adjacent room where sexual contact occurred at the young man's initiative. Meanwhile, Matt and Daisy went off alone into another room, where there was a large bed. Paige saw what was happening in that room several times when the door opened. Daisy was lying on the bed, almost unconscious, unable to speak or move. And Matt took advantage of her helpless state and engaged in sexual contact with Daisy. His friend, Jordan Z., filmed what was happening on his smartphone camera. At around 2 in the morning, the boys decided it was time to disperse. They put the girls in the car and drove them back to the Coleman house. Paige got out of the car first. Matt told her that Daisy needed to sit outside in the cold to sober up. The boys promised to stay with Daisy and watch over her. They told Paige to go home and go to bed. The friend took them at their word and left on her own. Instead, the boys took Daisy out of the car and stood her on her feet, supporting her so she wouldn't fall. The girl threw up, so they took off her shoes, her purse, and her cell phone, then carefully laid her on the cold ground near the house and quickly drove away, fearing they might be noticed. Daisy lay outside in sub-zero temperatures for about 3 hours. She had no socks or shoes, only a t-shirt and sweatpants. Her hair was wet and frozen. Early in the morning of January 8, 2012, around 5 a.m., Daisy's mother, Melinda Coleman, heard a strange knocking at the door. At first, she thought it was their dogs trying to get into the house to escape the cold. However, upon opening the door, Melinda saw her daughter Daisy lying on the doorstep, almost unconscious. Daisy was in critical condition, her hair frozen to the ground. She was dressed only in a shirt and sweatpants, and the air temperature was around 0. The girl reeked of alcohol, unable to speak, only able to cry. Melinda immediately called for help from her sons. The family carried Daisy into the house and tried to warm her with blankets. However, upon examining her daughter more closely, Melinda noticed bruises on her legs and realized that something terrible had happened. Using her knowledge as a veterinarian, Melinda carefully placed Daisy in a bath of cool water, gradually increasing the temperature to avoid complications from frostbite. Soon after, Melinda called the police. The officers who arrived examined Daisy but were unable to get a statement from her about the events of the previous night due to her condition. Instead, they listened to the account of Daisy's friend, Paige, who had been staying overnight at the Coleman house. The police thoroughly searched the house and surrounding area. In Daisy's room, they found 5 plastic liquor bottles. Outside, they discovered Daisy's purse, her cell phone, shoes, and traces of vomit. These findings corroborated Paige's account of the previous night's events. Daisy was taken to the hospital, where doctors conducted a thorough examination. Bruises were found on her legs and tears in her perineal area. A blood test showed that Daisy's blood alcohol level was almost twice the legal limit. A few hours later, when Daisy regained consciousness in the hospital, she was unable to recall the details of the previous night. The girl admitted that she had drunk too much and did not deny that she had taken alcohol from the home cabinet and run away to the boys at night without her mother's permission. At around 11 in the morning on January 8th, officers detained Matthew Barnett, Jordan Z., and Nicholas. They were charged and taken to the police station for questioning. During questioning, Matt Barnett did not deny having sexual contact with Daisy that night, but claimed it was consensual. He said that when he met Daisy and her friend Paige, the girls were already drunk. Initially, Matt denied giving Daisy anything to drink, but later admitted that he did pour her a few shots of liquor. Jordan Z. initially refused to give a statement, but then admitted to using his friend Nicholas's smartphone to record a video of Matt kissing Daisy. According to him, the video lasted about 10 seconds, and he deleted it after showing it to his friends. Nicholas, who had sexual contact with Daisy's friend Paige, was the only one who immediately fully admitted his guilt. He was sent to a juvenile detention center. Despite Sheriff Darren White's initial confidence that the case would lead to prosecution, the legal consequences of the incident turned out to be ambiguous and controversial. 2 months after the incident, in March 2012, the charges against Matthew Barnett and Jordan Z. were completely dropped. District Attorney Bert Price decided that the sexual contact between the young people was consensual. The video that Jordan filmed that night was never recovered, although several classmates claimed to have seen it. This decision sparked significant backlash in the community and beyond. Suspicions arose about possible influence on the course of the case by Matt Barnett's grandfather, Rex Barnett, who was a former member of the state legislature and had ties to law enforcement. Although Rex Barnett denied using his influence to have the charges dropped, these suspicions continued to circulate. Missouri state law defined sexual intercourse as non-consensual if the victim was incapacitated due to alcohol intoxication. However, despite Daisy's high blood alcohol level, this provision was not applied in this case. In the end, Matt Barnett pleaded guilty only to a misdemeanor charge of endangering the welfare of a child, not the felony charge of sexual assault. His sentence varies in different sources, from 2 years probation to 4 months in jail, which was replaced with 2 years of probation. He was also required to pay the Coleman family $1,800 in restitution. The reaction of the Maryville community to these events was mixed and often hostile towards Daisy and her family. Instead of support, Daisy faced hostility and bullying from her peers. Most of her acquaintances sided with Matt, and she instantly became an outcast, withdrawing into herself and trying to spend more time alone at home. Daisy was forced to leave the school cheerleading team. Her mother, Melinda, received anonymous threats at home and at work on a daily basis. Eventually, Melinda was asked to resign from the veterinary clinic where she had worked for many years. The harassment was not limited to personal contacts. A massive campaign against Daisy unfolded on social networks. Offensive hashtags were created, and at one dance competition, a girl appeared in a homemade shirt with the inscription "Matt 1, Daisy 0." This hostility from the community had serious consequences for Daisy's mental health. She began to suffer from depression and even made a suicide attempt. Pressure from the community and constant threats eventually forced the Coleman family to make the decision to move out of Maryville. They returned to their previous home in Albany, hoping to find peace and a chance to start over. However, problems continued to plague the family. In the spring of 2013, their empty house in Maryville, which had been put up for sale, burned down. The police were unable to determine the cause of the fire, but there were rumors that it could have been the handiwork of Matt Barnett's father. This incident further heightened the sense of persecution and danger felt by the Coleman family. Interestingly, sometime later, under similarly mysterious circumstances, the house of Daisy's friend, Paige, also burned down. By that time, the girls had stopped communicating. Paige had also become an outcast at school and was reportedly suffering from nightmares for a long time. The move did not bring the expected relief to the Coleman family. Daisy continued to struggle with the psychological consequences of what she had experienced. She withdrew into herself, suffered from depression, and developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The girl, who had previously led an active social life and had been involved in sports and dance, now tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. Melinda Coleman also faced serious difficulties. The loss of her job and the constant stress over the situation with her daughter took a heavy toll on her mental state. She tried to support Daisy but also needed help herself. Daisy's brothers, especially the older Charlie, tried to protect their sister and support her, but they too suffered from the consequences of the situation, losing friends and facing hostility at school. Despite all these difficulties, the Coleman family tried to stick together and support each other. They sought professional psychological help and tried to find new ways to cope with the trauma and move forward. Daisy Coleman's story gradually began to attract the attention of the national media, so this helped draw attention to the issue of teen sexual violence and the shortcomings of the justice system in such cases. In 2016, a Netflix documentary was released that told the story of Daisy Coleman and Audrey Pott, another girl who experienced a similar situation. The film explored themes of sexual assault, bullying, and harassment on social media, as well as their long-term consequences. Participating in the film became a way for Daisy to tell her story and draw attention to the problem. She openly talked about her experiences, the difficulties she faced, and how they affected her life. Gradually, Daisy began turning her painful experience into a platform for activism. She became a prominent activist, speaking out against sexual violence and supporting other victims. In 2017, Daisy became one of the founders of the organization Safe Bay, which worked to raise awareness about sexual violence among middle and high school students. Her efforts were recognized, and in 2013, HuffPost named Daisy one of the 13 bravest teens of the year. She spoke at various events, gave interviews, and used her experience to help others. However, despite the outward success of her activism, Daisy continued to struggle with inner demons. She openly talked about her battles with depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. In her social media posts, Daisy often mentioned how hard it was for her to cope with the thoughts inside, panic attacks and constant nightmarish memories. Her activism became a way to cope with the trauma, but it also constantly reminded her of what she had experienced. Daisy balanced between the desire to help others and the need to protect herself from re-traumatization. Despite Daisy's efforts to start a new life in her activism, tragedies continued to haunt the Coleman family. In June 2018, a new catastrophe occurred that deeply affected Daisy and her family. Her 19-year-old brother, Tristan Ash Coleman, died in a car accident. He was returning home after helping Daisy move to Colorado Springs. This loss was another blow to the family, who had already been through so many tragedies. Daisy was especially close to Tristan, considering him her best friend. In an Instagram post, Daisy wrote, "I don't understand why the universe decided today was the day to let you go, but I will never stop loving you. You will forever be my best friend. My little brother, you will always be." This loss seriously affected Daisy's mental state. She continued to struggle with depression and PTSD, but her brother's death deepened her emotional problems. In 2020, the situation for Daisy worsened even more. In the summer of that year, she began complaining to friends that she was being stalked by an unknown man who constantly sent her threats. This situation lasted for several months, starting in December 2019. Daisy turned to the police and filed reports, but it seemed she did not receive proper help. She wrote on social media that she was afraid to leave the house, couldn't walk her dog, or go to work. Daisy claimed that the stalker might have stolen the keys to her apartment and could now freely enter her home. In addition, Daisy reported that the unknown man stole her photos and registered on one of the websites, offering intimate services for money on her behalf. This situation further increased her fear and sense of vulnerability. On August 4, 2020, Daisy wrote a post on Twitter about being afraid to leave the house. She reported that she had stopped eating and sleeping due to constant fear. A few hours later, she published a new post on Facebook, where she said that some man had come up to her house and knocked on the door. Daisy's mother, Melinda, upon reading these messages, called the Colorado police and asked them to check on her daughter. Officers arrived at Daisy's place around 4 p.m. They spent about an hour with her, listened to her story about the stalking, but didn't notice anything suspicious in her behavior. However, shortly after the police left, 23-year-old Daisy Coleman committed suicide. Her body was found at 8:30 p.m. that same evening. This tragic event shocked everyone who knew Daisy and followed her story. News of Daisy Coleman's suicide caused a wave of shock and grief among her supporters, activists, and the general public. Her mother, Melinda Coleman, reported her daughter's death by posting on social media. She wrote, "She was my best friend and an amazing daughter. I wish I could take her pain onto myself. She never recovered from what those boys did to her, and it's just not fair. My baby girl is gone." Melinda admitted that she had been fighting for Daisy's mental health for many years. She felt she had done everything possible for her beloved daughter, but it was not enough. Reactions to Daisy's death were diverse. Many people expressed their sadness and condolences to the Coleman family. Activists fighting against sexual violence emphasized that her death demonstrates the long-term consequences of trauma and the need for better support for victims. However, there were also those who continued to attack Daisy even after her death. In particular, former Sheriff Darren White, who led the investigation into Daisy's case in 2012, made a controversial statement. Then he suggested that Daisy may have committed suicide at this particular moment to harm his chances of being re-elected as sheriff. This statement sparked outrage in many people and led to White losing the election. Matthew Barnett, who was at the center of the events in 2012, also commented on Daisy's death in a brief statement. He said, "I don't have any specific comments, it's just very sad." He added that although he is doing fine, the experience of being accused of rape was difficult for him. "I'm still dealing with it, but I'm doing okay," he said. Tragically, the story of the Coleman family did not end there. 4 months after Daisy's death in December 2020, her mother, Melinda Coleman, also committed suicide. Before her death, she published several poignant posts on social media dedicated to Daisy. In one of them, she wrote, "There aren't enough I love yous that I could have said when I held your cold, broken, dead body." Melinda's death was another blow to the Coleman family. Only 2 sons remained from the family, the older Charlie and the younger Logan. Daisy's charity organized a fundraiser to support the brothers. These tragic events sparked a new wave of discussions about the long-term consequences of sexual assault, the importance of mental health support for victims, and the need for changes in the justice system. The story of Daisy Coleman has become a symbol of the fight against sexual violence and a reminder of how trauma can affect a person's life for many years. Daisy Coleman's tragic story, and that of her family, has sparked widespread social resonance, highlighting a number of systemic problems in society and the U.S. legal system. First, this story drew attention to the issue of sexual violence among adolescents and youth. Daisy's case showed how easily violence can occur at parties with alcohol, and how important it is to educate young people to understand the concept of consent and respect the personal boundaries of others. Second, the reaction of the Maryville community to Daisy's allegations revealed deeply rooted problems in society's attitudes toward victims of sexual violence. Instead of support, Daisy faced bullying and accusations, highlighting the need for a change in public consciousness regarding these issues. Third, the handling of Daisy's case by law enforcement and the judicial system raised questions about the fairness and impartiality of justice, especially in cases where the accused have influential relatives or high social status. Daisy's activist work after the violence she experienced became an important contribution to the fight against sexual violence. The organization Safe Bay, which Daisy co-founded, continues to work to raise awareness about sexual violence among school and college students. The documentary film Audrey Daisy has become an important tool for drawing attention to the problem of sexual violence and its consequences. It continues to be used in educational programs and discussions about sexual violence. The deaths of Daisy and her mother highlighted the importance of long-term psychological support for victims of sexual violence and their families. has drawn attention to the need to improve the system of psychological assistance and support for those who have experienced traumatic withdrawal. Daisy's story has also influenced discussions about the role of social media in cases of sexual violence. On the one hand, social networks became a platform for bullying Daisy. On the other hand, they allowed her to tell her story and find support. Legislative initiatives in some U.S. states have been partially inspired by Daisy's story. These initiatives are aimed at strengthening the protection of victims of sexual violence and improving the procedures for investigating such crimes. The story of Daisy Coleman is a tragic example of how one night can change a person's life forever. It highlights numerous problems that exist in society regarding sexual violence, justice, and victim support. First of all, this story demonstrates how serious and long-lasting the consequences of sexual violence can be. The trauma Daisy experienced affected her entire future life, despite her attempts to overcome it through activism and helping others. Secondly, the reaction of the Maryville community to Daisy's allegations shows how deeply rooted myths and stereotypes about sexual violence are. Instead of support, Daisy faced disbelief and accusations, highlighting the need for better education and a change in public consciousness regarding these issues. The behavior of law enforcement and the judicial system in Daisy's case raises serious questions about the fairness and impartiality of justice. This underscores the need for reforms in the system of investigation and trial of sexual violence cases. Daisy's story also highlights the role of social media in modern society. On the one hand, they became a tool for bullying and harassing Daisy. On the other hand, they allowed her to tell her story and find support. Daisy's activist work after the violence she experienced shows how traumatic experiences can be turned into a force for change. However, her tragic death reminds us that even the strongest activists need support and help. The deaths of Daisy and her mother underscore the importance of long-term psychological support for victims of sexual violence and their families. This should become a priority for healthcare and social support systems. Finally, this story reminds us of the importance of responsible alcohol consumption, especially among young people. The events of that fateful night could have unfolded differently if all participants had been sober. Daisy Coleman's story remains a powerful reminder of the need for ongoing work to change public consciousness, improve the legal system, and enhance support for victims of sexual violence. Her short but impactful life continues to inspire activists and advocates for the rights of victims of sexual violence around the world. Thank you for watching, and I remind you that it would be great if you support the video by liking and subscribing to the channel.